New polling shows overwhelmingly the majority of Americans are not on board with President Trump's military action in Iran with the war there. Analysis earlier this month in the New York Times found initial support for the attack was far lower than that of previous foreign conflicts. Joining us now, president of the progressive public opinion research firm Impact Research, Molly Murphy. Also with us, the host of Politics Nation on MS Now, Reverend Al Sharpton. He, of course, is president of the National Action Network. Good morning to you both, Molly. So if you can, just walk us through some of the polling, public polling that we know, how Americans are feeling about the war with Iran and how it may compare to wars in the past.
Sure. I mean, it is stunning. This is the first war in the history of American polling that starts out with net opposition. 59%, 60%, depending on the poll, oppose this war. They believe that it was not the right decision. They question the rationale. I think one thing that is remarkable to me in these numbers is it's not just that a majority of Americans, around 55%, say that Iran posed no imminent threat, but they also don't believe that President Trump has offered any rationale as to going in. 62% believe that the president hasn't offered a rationale, and that's truly a stunning thing. Whether Americans support a conflict or not, they typically do believe that there has been messaging and an explanation as to why. They can choose to agree with it or not, and even that is not happening here.
For some of us, Molly, it's hard to, not you, of course, because you probably were still in elementary school while the Iraq War was starting up in 2003. But for many of us, we remember that war started with an overwhelming majority of Americans supporting it. I think over 70%, overwhelming majority of senators voted for President Bush to move forward with authorization of that war. The first Gulf War, the same thing happened. By the end of those wars, both Bush 41 and Bush 43 were enjoying poll numbers in the high 80s, low 90s. It was truly extraordinary how Americans rallied together at a time of war. That's not happening now. I'm curious, you mentioned the president not building up and explaining why he was going to war in a way that was clear to Americans. What are you finding in the polls? Is that one of the reasons why this war may have started off with less Americans approving it?
Yes, I think that's one huge part of it. It felt like whiplash. I did focus groups 2 weeks ago with Trump voters. One woman said, you know, I go to bed one night, I turn on the TV Saturday morning and we're at war. And it just was a shock to people. Even if you think about ahead of the U.S.'s involvement in Ukraine, what were we seeing in the weeks leading up? We were seeing tanks rolling in. There's imagery. There's a clear and obvious need and imperative. That didn't happen here. But the other part that we're seeing in the polls where this comes from is, where does Trump start even before the conflict? Over the course of his term in office, he started off promising no more forever wars. He's going to end these long, prolonged conflicts. And they've seen time and again him go back on his word there. And so this isn't also the first time that they're seeing an additional engagement in foreign policy that they didn't expect and that they don't want. And so his approval rating on foreign policy is at its lowest level. It's at 38%. But that had fallen even in the months leading up. So he's not starting from a place of credibility on this, which is also damaging his ability to justify or explain this in any way.
And Rev, the war is unpopular. The president's handling of foreign policy is unpopular. But that just adds to the idea that he's already also let down Americans with what he promised on the economy. That even a bigger issue for so many voters we're seeing is the prices are still too high. Yes, particularly in the last 2 weeks, prices at the pump because of the war. But even before that, his tariffs, and other measures, he simply wasn't fulfilling what he set out to do. And they're paying the price.
When you look at what he promised his voters and supporters, and then he did almost a 180-degree turn and went to other issues, there's no surprise to me that he's suffering in the polls. And the fact is, he promised one thing, including a border peace, and now he's bringing us into where he brought in the head of state of Venezuela, now a war in Iran, and none of it explained, and it's the exact opposite of what he campaigned on. And Molly, how much of that, your polling, suggests that people that bought into one set of commitments and promises feel like they are seeing something different, if not outright have been deceived.
That is a dominant perception on Donald Trump. These things all do work together in people's minds. So overwhelming, one of his worst numbers is in handling costs. And one of the things that we've seen since this conflict began is he had one bright spot, which was gas prices. If you would sit in a focus group or in the polls, his approval on gas was generally pretty good. Or if you said, are there any costs that actually are going pretty well right now, they'd say gas prices. And that has also changed almost overnight. Well, in 28 days, it's changed. And now 85% are saying they're worried about cost. And what people are feeling is that he is not focused on these costs. This is not an effort where he's trying and failing. They are continuously seeing him put his attention elsewhere. And he's also putting the checkbook elsewhere. And I think that's a big problem, too, when he's willing to send money to Argentina. He's asking for $200 billion from Congress for this war. They're wondering, where is this money coming from? This is not going to bring costs down. And they can't really take much more of this.
So, Molly, let's talk about just generally foreign policy. It seems to me that presidents very rarely get rewarded for successful foreign policy maneuvers, but often get punished. I go back again. You can look at Bush 41. The Soviet Union collapses in 1991, the end of 1991. George H.W. Bush leaves the Gulf War in late 1991 with, a 90% plus approval rating. He loses the election the next year. We know what happened to Bush 43, also extraordinarily popular at the beginning of the war, ended up his numbers just absolutely collapsing. Joe Biden in Afghanistan, he was above 50% until the chaotic exit of Afghanistan. He never went above 50% again. And I would just say, just for historical perspective, Winston Churchill saved Great Britain in the Battle of Britain, saved Western civilization, won the war, and before he even got home from the Potsdam Conference, he had been voted out. I mean, this seems to be a warning for both Republicans and Democrats. You have to do your job on foreign policy, but if you're not focused on affordability, you're in big trouble.
That's absolutely right. And that's what Americans are saying. They don't think this is a conflict that's going to end quickly, but they do want the pain and the years of cost burden to be addressed, and that's not what they're seeing.
So much, President of Impact Research, Molly Murphy. Greatly appreciate it.